Aloha and welcome, friends and family. This is The Art of Life, your weekly show that airs on Fridays from 2 to 3 p.m. here in the heart of downtown. We're broadcasting from Pioneer Plaza, and we're here to discover some of the amazing people who make Hawaii such a unique place. Our guest today certainly fits the bill, and if you don't know about Kenny Endo, well, I think you might be living on a rock, and I'm not talking about Hawaii. Kenny Endo is a multi-talented artist, not only in the genre of music, but also collaborations that bring old world values with contemporary styling. So let's get right to the chase. Kenny Endo, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Will. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Year of the Horse. Most auspicious to start the new year off with a man of music and rhythm. I'd love for our audience to know a little bit about you. So I think that, from my understanding, whenever you can have you on the bill, because I've been in a lot of events with you, people always say in hushed tones, "Oh, Kenny Endo." Oh. Then that's all they say, because it's like you've developed this amazing and deservedly standard of excellence for music. How did you get involved with taiko and all of the types of musical things you do?
Well, I grew up in California, and I've loved drums my whole life. I started playing when I was in 4th grade, just Western drums.
Right.
Later got into drum set and got into music like a lot of jazz, funk, Latin music. And then I discovered taiko, and I started playing when I was a student at UCLA. And the sound of the drum, the taiko, you not only hear it with your ears, you can feel it down to your bones.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw it, I said, oh, I got to do that. And so, this next year, 2015, will be my 40th anniversary of playing taiko. And we have some events around that. But yeah, I originally started with a group called Kinnara Taiko, which was based at a temple in LA called Senshin. And then studied with a teacher from Japan named Tanaka Sensei, who at that time was the only teacher outside of Japan.
Okay.
He started the very first taiko group in 1968, the San Francisco Taiko Dojo. And so I went to study with Tanaka Sensei after I graduated, and he was encouraging me to go to Japan and study. And so in 1980, I moved to Japan, intending to stay only a year or two, and it ended up being 10 years.
Wow.
And the more I study, the more I realize how little I know. And so it's an ongoing project of just trying to learn as much as I can and get as much experience.
Absolutely. Now, you touched on a couple of topics that are threads throughout the art of life, and also things that I say as a teacher, and I'm sure that you do. This understanding that perhaps people think, oh, well, one day you just woke up and you decided to play the drums. It's actually a lifelong practice, and there's a continuum of studying with teachers and masters and what have you. And to add to that, the idea that there's always something to learn is very fascinating. What do you find is something that keeps you coming back? What is it like when you start? You feel like, okay, you need to know maybe these basic rhythms or these certain types of songs and what have you. There might be some criteria that is considered a standard base knowledge. Do you find that you have to come back to that and you explore new things with that, or what keeps you coming back?
Yeah, I think for taiko, it's not only just playing the drums, but there's a concept called kata, which is form.
Okay.
So you're one of my teachers in Japan, who's actually a ningen kokuho, a national treasure. He told me you can't break tradition if you don't know tradition.
Yes.
And so it's kind of like describing the foundation of a house. You can, if your foundation is really strong, and you can build any kind of building you want on top of it. But if the foundation's weak, then it's going to have problems. But the foundation is something that always has to be working on. In Japanese, they say ude o migaku, which means to constantly work on your technique, work on the basics. So that becomes the basis for any kind of innovation or any kind of new thing you want to do with it.
Right. I would say that perhaps, if I may use this term, traditional art forms seem to share a root of this understanding that you have to have that strong foundation, you have to have those basic forms for something to build upon. Do you find that there is sometimes a push and pull between this traditional understood way and then maybe the immediacy of today? Because I think sometimes you'll have students that they'll say, I want to learn the forms. Like, do you have people say, how many lessons do I have to take before I'm a taiko drummer? This is something that dance teachers often hear. How many lessons do I have to take before I'm a hula dancer or before I'm a jazz singer? And maybe not understanding that it's a lifelong experience.
Yeah, that's definitely true. A lot of times people will see our performance and they'll think, well, gee, I want to do that. And we try to make it as accessible to as many people as possible.
Right.
And our courses are fairly short so that people can enter and exit, when they want. But I always tell them that although this class is a beginning one class, if you're in here for 3 years, that's totally fine.
And pretty normal, I would say, many forms. Awesome.
Yeah, because here, in American society, everything is instant. So everybody wants to be able to do something really quickly. But nearing 40 years, I'm realizing that it's a lifelong journey, and even after 40 years, there's just so much more that I need to practice on, much more I want to create. Many more things to learn as well.
Something I'd like for our viewers to know, if they're unfamiliar with taiko, because I think people think a drum is basically an object, then there's a striking of it and there's a creation of a sound. But taiko is very unique because it's often done standing, and correct me if I'm wrong, and the physical exertion of energy, it's very much like dance or martial arts or a combination of the two. I was thinking maybe you could address that for our viewers, because they might think that being a good drummer is just having a sense of rhythm, but from what I see, it's so much more than that.
Yeah, definitely. I call it a combining your mind, your body, and your spirit. But it's definitely not just being able to play the rhythms correctly, and it's also definitely not just being able to move well. Although people who do have a dance background tend to do well with the movements, and those with a music background tend to do well with the rhythms. But it's kind of a combination of those things, and it takes a while to stop thinking and let your instincts or your natural inner talents take over. A lot of times, especially when people become adults, thinking that they can't do something is the biggest obstacle.
It's a huge obstacle. It stops probably most people right in their tracks. And it's a new year, so hey, it's time to start some new things. I'm curious if there is maybe a meditative component or a prescribed breathing methodology. So sometimes like in classical Indian dance or in yoga, there's pranayama, there's breathing exercises, or there's a synchronization of the breath. And then in other forms of dance or movement, you might have a meditation, whether it's a walking or a moving meditation or a seated meditation. Is there a format or a practice that you use or you encourage your students to partake?
Well, it's not exactly like meditating, say, in Buddhism, but the breathing aspect is very important.
Right.
And it's not so much that you're breathing out when you strike and breathing in as you're preparing, because the rhythms, depending on the speed, vary so much. But I think it's more a very slow breathing that you want to get into, and a calmness, and a state of not thinking too much.
And that's regardless of whether the beat is up-tempo and fast or slow. So that's like the constant is this even keel.
Yeah, in fact, the faster it is, the more calm you need to be, I think.
You might hyperventilate, and that would be bad. Wow, it's totally fascinating. These are the things that I'm hoping people might be wondering when they're hearing and watching the ensemble or yourself, but we rarely have a chance to ask. We can't, tap you on the shoulder and ask you 10 questions while you're in the middle of a set. So I'm thrilled to be able to ask you some of these things. Just some random questions off the top of my head. in certain forms of drumming, there's a phonetic language or a sound that's created to emulate the sound of the drum. So, for example, with a Middle Eastern drum like the doumbek, you generally have the doom and the tek. And when you're teaching drum, you might say doom doom as doom tek, or taka tini if you're working with a tabla with Southeast Asian drums. I'm curious, is there a similar spoken language of drums used for teaching or memorization of rhythms and patterns?
Yeah, definitely. In Japan, it's called kuchi shoga, and the sounds actually represent, the sound you're supposed to play. So that's actually the way I teach, because that's the way I was taught. In fact, if you look at the musical traditions around the world, outside of the European classical tradition, most cultures use some form of oral tradition to pass those words on. But we say words such as, for a big drum, don, or dorotsuku, loud, loud, soft, soft. Don kara, kara kara to hit on the rim. So that becomes a way of not only learning how to play the instrument, but also, once you are a performer, to memorize pieces for performance.
Absolutely. And I think there's kind of this belief or understanding that if you can say it, it increases your chances of actually being able to complete it or to do it. So even if your body is not synced up there yet, you have it somewhere in your gray matter, and you can say it with your mouth.
I find that's actually the best way for people to learn in that situation. What I usually have them do is to actually just say the pattern, and then we add motion without hitting the drum. And saying the pattern is don don dorotsuku don don, and then they try it on the drum. And by going through that process and not relying on the notation so much, they're actually able to learn it quicker.
Interesting.
And so they definitely need to be able to say it. One of the projects I'm doing is called Uncommon Time, and it is a combination with Japanese Taiko, Indian tabla, and Afro-Latin percussion. And there's a couple pieces where each of us in our own languages are saying our patterns, and then we'll say a pattern and I'll say a Japanese drum pattern, and the tabla player will try to play that on his tablas, and then he'll say something, and then the Afro-Latin percussion will try to play it. So there's this kind of play. This is
a call and response, almost like maybe birds, each sharing a different call and imitating. That's so cool.
And then there's a section where we're all saying it all at once. This composition I wrote called Tenki Joho, which means weather report in English. So that's one of the collaborations I do. But yeah, the use of language for expressing the rhythms is definitely, in every culture.
Yeah, excellent. We are learning so many interesting things about the art of taiko with our guest Kenny Endo. We have to take our quick little break, but don't go away because we'll be back with more. This is The Art of Life.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back to The Art of Life. Happy New Year. We have a special guest today. In fact, every guest is special, but super special to have Kenny Endo simply because he is such an incredibly busy artist, teacher, and collaborator. So welcome back.
Thank you.
And we were talking about some of the articulations and the sounds used in the rhythm, and also collaboration. So you mentioned, if I can remember, I remember Afro-Latin was the term.
The project called Uncommon Time.
Uncommon Time.
It mixes Japanese taiko with Indian tabla and Afro-Latin percussion.
Fantastic. Now this is just one of many collaborations I've seen you do. Last year you had a fantastic collaboration at the University of Hawaii with the dance department. Tell us a little bit about that, because you were working with, I believe, Betsy Fisher, and she was choreographing, and she's based in predominantly Western technique. Forgive me if I'm mistaken there. But you've also done different types of collaboration with dancers of different backgrounds.
Yeah, I have collaborated. This particular project was really a lot of fun. We got a grant from MOCA, which is the Mayor's Office on Culture and the Arts, to develop a couple of pieces. My piece actually used Uchiwa Daiko, and I actually have one right here. These are fan drums, which are traditionally played by monks in the Nichiren sect of Buddhism as they would chant in procession. But they're also used in contemporary music, and I had this idea of taking 12 people with 12 different tones and sizes of these drums, 6 dancers and 6 of our taiko performers, and to have them combine, and so that I wanted to blur the lines between the performer and the accompaniment. Oftentimes the musicians are put in the role of accompaniment, and the dancers are the ones they call the performers, but we in taiko call ourselves performers as well. But I wanted to actually create the rhythms and the music on these drums, and Peggy, the professor at UH, choreographed these patterns, and I thought she did a wonderful job into making these rhythms come alive through the movement.
Right, and that's Peggy Gaither Adams for our dance fans out there, also affiliated with the University of Hawaii Dance Department. You know, you brought up something that I think is interesting, and that is the idea of how do we define who's a dancer or a performer and a musician. And I know that certainly in hula and also in classical Indian dance, and even with Middle Eastern dance with the awalim, or the learned woman, there was always an expectation for a dancer to be able to also have musicality and to also use the voice and be a singer. And it's interesting to see how in some regards we've moved away from this, and there's a divorcing or separation of that. I find as a performer and also as an audience member that when you have live music, it adds a component that's just irreplaceable. You don't get the same thing with recorded music. Mark Morris he always uses live music with his dance company if the budget allows for it.
That's great.
What's your experience with this, with dancers or you know?
Yeah, I find that as a audience member, when I go see dance or even theater, when the music is live, it just brings everything alive. It actually enhances
There's
the
a synergy
movements.
there.
Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to do with this project is to have live music in every piece. So there was 9 pieces on the program, and all of them had live music. So 2 of them were brand new pieces, and then the others were rearranged pieces.
Something I think that also that dynamic brings into it is there's always something very different. And I think people assume that when there's a choreography or there's something set, that the idea is that there's a standardization, it's the same every time. But certainly with live music, that changes it even more.
Right.
So I'm wondering, since you were there, because the show can't go on without you in that context, what was it like to be able to see the subtle or maybe not so subtle variations from night to night, or a matinee from an evening performance? Was it interesting?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. We tried to keep a consistent quality in our performance, but still there were variations. I mean, there were times when certain pieces worked really well one night, and other pieces worked better on some other nights. But it was great. It was a great experience for my ensemble as well, to be able to do that many shows and to work. We worked on it basically from August, and the shows were in February, so we had about a half a year to.
That's a long time.
And as we got closer to the performances, we were rehearsing almost every day.
Yeah. And that's great, because it really brings it together like an ohana. I mean, you're really a team. I think from my experience, when people just kind of, I mean, and this happens frequently in jazz, you know, you sit in, and this is great too, and you collaborate, but there's something to be said of a group of individuals that perform together and train together with frequency, because there's an unspoken glue that develops, a bond, and an intuitiveness to the performance itself, and the experience of creating together.
Yeah.
Indeed.
It's a concept of something being so tight that it can relax and be loose.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than being so loose from the beginning that it becomes tight, like uptight. So
what he said.
You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I'm curious about this. Again, I'm referencing a lot of things because I'm unsure what the criteria might be in the world of Taiko, or maybe it's different from every group or every teacher. But in classical Indian dance, there's a gesture that's done that's given in honor of the earth, because you're stamping on the ground with these jatis, and you want to give respect to Mother Earth because you're basically stomping on her. When you enter a dojo, there's a protocol where you bow before entering and before exiting. I'm curious, is there a certain type of pattern or ritual that is instilled within Taiko or with your group before you perform or train?
Yeah, actually in our dojo we do the same thing. When people enter, they do a slight bow as they enter the entrance, and then when they leave. And then also usually when we start our classes or rehearsals, it's just a show of respect to each other.
Yeah.
A show of respect to the dojo, to each other, to the instruments, to the art form. So even in our public classes, we try to begin in our classes that way.
That's nice. An act of humility and acknowledgement, I think, is important.
Yeah.
Kind of keeps you grounded.
So there are certain things that I, in my training in Japan that I felt were very valuable that I try to keep alive here.
Awesome. I had another question about space, because there was a time when the chapel was being renovated, being part of the KCC thing, that you had to find another space. Taiko it's space intensive in the sense that the instruments themselves are large, and the sound that's created is large, and probably the students that you have is a decent size number of people that come. Is it challenging to find spaces to practice Taiko?
Yeah, definitely. We were at KCC for 20 years, and I really appreciated our time there, and we're still there. But finding a space where you can make sound without bothering people is really important, and because you can't really practice in peace knowing that someone doesn't really like the sounds they're hearing or is bothered by the sounds. So yeah, that's the Taiko Center of the Pacific is the name of our school, but my wife Chizuko and I established it in 1994, so it's
20 years.
20 years, yeah.
Congratulations.
And the eventual goal is to have a permanent space where that would be soundproof, and we could practice more often.
Even at 3 a.m. Yeah, right.
Sure.
When the moment moves you or the jet lag kicks in.
Yeah.
You said something about the ability to create sound without worrying that it's bothering somebody. It's not limited to drums, because as a singer, I remember in my teen years, I was always nervous about being able to commit to making the sound that the voice was capable of, because one, I didn't want other people to hear me, but also, people might say, hey, I'm trying to watch The Simpsons right now, I don't want to hear you singing. It does happen. And I found that really held me back in my training for a very long time. And one of my voice teachers asked me, she said, where do you practice? Like, where is your practice space? And I said, well, I just kind of, get little bits and pieces here and there. And she said, no, it's essential that you find a safe place where you can, really expand and use your voice the way it's intended to, because if you have these kind of half-voice practice sessions, you're never really going to know what your instrument is capable of. Would you say the same is true of drumming? Are there alternatives, or? It's
definitely true, and because of the sound, I practice at home, but I put T-shirts over the drums, and try to block out all the windows, but I do have a dedicated space that I do that in, and I try to practice every day.
Yeah.
But like you said, it is important to have that space that you know that you can just concentrate and really make good use of the time.
I always say for me, it's the ability to commit to my mistakes. Because it's like you can't even really make a mistake when you're too concerned about making noise or disturbing somebody. In addition to this drum, there's a whole litany of different instruments that you play, different percussive instruments and the flute. Can you tell us a little bit about the different instruments that you enjoy playing?
Sure. One of the smaller drums is a rope drum. It almost looks like a snare drum. It's about that size, but it has rope, very high pitched. That's called a shimedaiko, and it comes from the word shimeru, which means to tighten. So that's a very high pitched drum used in a lot of festival music, used in the kabuki theater as well, and used in taiko ensembles, which we call kumidaiko. There are the larger drums that have the skins actually pulled onto the body and tacked with what we call byo or tacks, and those usually the larger ones you would see. They come in all sizes, but the more famous ones are what we call an odaiko, the really big drums. And so the sticks would be really thick, and you would actually, use your whole body and get into a whole stance with
I'm
it.
assuming that the core and the arms and it's a full body workout for those people who are looking for ways to not go to the gym. You can't be passive about this. It's not just a wrist action, it's the whole body that's getting into this creating of music.
Yeah, there's a tendency for people to use muscle power initially, and I tell them that muscle power will only make the sound go so far, but if you use from way down in here, in this area below your belly button, we call tanden in Japanese.
Okay.
And I say this is where your rhythm emanates from, your spirit emanates from here, your
Would this
movement.
be similar to like a solar plexus type of thing?
Yeah.
Wow.
Your movement as well as your energy, and so if you think of the rest of your body as being relaxed and everything emanating from here, then the sound is actually more powerful, and even a softer sound can go through the drum, and the larger sounds as well. So, and if you apply that concepts, then the very young and the very old can also get a really great sound out of the drum.
Yeah, fantastic. Gosh, I have a feeling that you're going to be a repeat offender. I might have to have you come back again. We have to take another quick break, but please stay with us because we have some interesting images to review as well as some music that we'd like for you to hear. This is The Art of Life.
We want to thank our underwriters.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future.
Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions.
I'm Nicole Horry. Thanks so much for joining us on Think Tech.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
If you're just joining us, and I'm not sure if that's possible, but this is The Art of Life. I'm your host, Willow Chang, and we broadcast every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. on Think Tech Hawaii. You can also check us out with some back issues or episodes on YouTube. Our guest today is Kenny Endo. He's a composer, an artist, musician, and definitely an innovator in many ways, as well as a traditionalist. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We were discussing the different types of instruments that you play, and I think we got through 3 different types of drum, but I think it may be not known to most people that you also play the flute.
Oh yeah, I actually brought Ike to show you. You can
Great.
hear it too if you want. This instrument is called a shinobue,
Okay.
and it's a piece of the bamboo is actually called shinodake. The word for bamboo is take in Japanese. And this is the most common melodic instrument found with taiko, mainly because it has a high pitch and can cut through the sound of
Ah,
the
yes.
drums. So in all the festival music, as well as the music in the kabuki theater, the classical music and no as well, you find this bamboo flute.
That is fantastic. The sound of the flute, I'm not sure if it's the same type, but going through the shopping arcades in Kyoto and they play the music overhead, the Shinto music. And I
Yeah.
remember on my first trip, like, I was on a mad goose chase. I was trying to find the source of this music, thinking I would see people eventually somewhere playing. And then I finally, about like the 4th day, I realized
It was
I think it's
speakers.
just the speakers. They just constantly play this music, and I was looking all over for the sound. But it was kind of a radical concept to have sacred music playing in a shopping center. I think it's something we might need to look into. Christmas is probably the only time we get even close to that.
That's right. Yeah.
I was curious about instrumental music. When you're not playing, do you listen to a lot of instrumental music, or do you listen to music with voice? Is there ever music that's created with taiko for voice? It clearly would have to be amplified. And
Well, actually, a lot of the traditional music, for example, there's a type of music that I studied called nagauta, which means long song.
okay,
And it's the main type of music used in kabuki. And in that music, what we call the hayashi, or the drum and flute ensemble, they're actually accompanying both the singers and the shamisen players.
okay.
And so actually the singing is the main thing, and when we're learning the pieces, we take our cues from both the lyrics as well and the shamisen lines. So there's a lot to learn in that. In pure taiko music, in some of the pieces that I've developed, I've used people singing some of the melodies I write. So I write melodies, and on the recording we use certain instruments, but sometimes I'll collaborate with a guitar player from New York
Right.
or something. So if I have the music and I can send it to them in advance, then it's possible to play it. So my music is flexible in that it doesn't have to be a certain instrument all the time.
Fantastic. Now, I'm curious about the element of fusion, which you do frequently, and you're able to navigate these two, I don't want to say polarities, but 2 different approaches. Clearly a traditional approach, a continuum of a style, and then fusion, things that are contemporary or borrowing from many different backgrounds. When you're approached with a fusion concept, are there ever times when you just say, oh, I don't know, man, like, it's kind of out of the parameters of what would be considered respectful for taiko or from my teachers? I know sometimes I'm asked, like, isn't there any way you could, like, do a hula belly dancing thing with, like, some little hip-hop jumping around? And, you know, you start to listen to these elements, and I think about it, and sometimes I just have to say, for me, I'll say, I'm sure someone can do it. I'm not sure if I'm that person. Like, I'm not sure how to navigate this and do it respectfully, because they might seem just so diametrically opposed or so opposite that it's hard to find that common ground.
I think the key to making that work is to find artists who are open to doing that and are strong enough in their foundation that they can break out of it without worrying too much. And also I found that if, say, I'm collaborating with Bharatanatyam,
Right.
which we did in the Taiko and Dance project, I was actually initially going through some of those steps and learning some of the jati
Yeah.
for the dance. Of course, I I'm not a dancer, and
Here's 4. Here's
couldn't-
number 5.
I couldn't do it very well, but I think it's important that at least I learned the vocabulary, at least, you know, what is the essence of where this is coming from, so even in a simple collaboration with other musicians, I think it's important to do that for the Western instruments to understand about taiko and its traditions and its uses, and for me to understand either classical music or jazz or whatever genre the music might be.
Yeah. Do you find that perhaps clearly with drums there's the option to tune them, but because maybe you're not working with the same set tuning that, say, a Western scale or an Oriental, yes, I use the O word, like ragas or maqams in Arabic music, and then Western scales, they're tuned very differently between half tones and quarter tones. Do you find that the drum lends itself a little more flexibility because you're dealing with the sounds of a percussive instrument like a drum?
Yeah, I think when you have a drum that has 2 skins on it, it's very hard to tune it to a specific pitch,
Right.
unless, and there are examples of that, but because it is not in a specific pitch, it will work with many different keys.
Yeah.
I know when the Indian tabla player, whenever we bring a melody, because we all either do vocals or the bamboo flute, or sometimes we have melody, and we collaborated with a jazz pianist earlier last year, but the tabla player always wants to know what key is it in,
Oh, how
and there's
interesting.
certain keys that
Yeah.
are easier for him to work in. So we usually try to adjust to that.
I'm curious, as an overview with taiko, has it been an uninterrupted lineage and continuation of theories and songs and a body of literature, or was there a time when it kind of went underground and it was maybe frowned upon, or it lost popularity? You know, sometimes, say with hula or even with Indian dance, there's these different cycles of energy of when you're allowed to do something or when there's creative resurgence of interest. And I'm wondering, is it the same with taiko?
Yeah, definitely, especially with what we call kumidaiko, the ensemble drumming, which really has exploded since the 1950s
Okay.
in Japan. And then, as I mentioned, the first group in the United States was in San Francisco. They started in 1968. So if you're looking at Japanese traditional arts, that's like yesterday almost.
Wow.
It's not. It's considered a new tradition,
Yeah.
and not, you know, what we call dento, or a real old tradition.
Right.
Whereas music such as the hogaku, or the classical music, which originally came from No theater and is used in kabuki and nagaoto music and also Japanese dance, that music has been ongoing and evolving over the years, probably for 200 to 300 years.
Okay.
And the folk music traditions are even older than that.
Wow. Or we say sugoi, right? Wow.
Sugoi, yes.
Sugoi. We have a couple of multimedia things here, even though we're Think Tech Hawaii. This is a little low tech, but we want to give you the experience here. We have some music that I thought we could play. This in my book is sacrilege. We're going to be speaking of your music, so my apologies in advance, but I want people to hear the sound of the drum. And while your music is playing, I'd love for our viewers to see some of the images you provided, because visuals are so important as well. So here we go. Oh.
So this piece is called Ame,
Okay.
and it means rain in Japanese, but the English title is Tears of the Earth. And I wrote this after 9/11 and dedicated to all the victims of 9/11, as well as 9/11's revenge.
Wow. Well, we're gonna just, so people, or if you're wondering what you're seeing some pictures of the man who's created this music. So could you tell us about the drum that's behind you? I think that's the double skin drum that you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, on my left hip is a small drum called the kotsuzumi, and that's a drum that...
That's the high-pitched drum you mentioned.
Yeah, you actually can control the sound by squeezing and releasing the ropes, and you hit it with your bare hand. It comes from No theater originally, is still used in No as well as Kabuki. The drums behind my head, that would be an example of a Byo Uchi Taiko, or a tacked drum. I think there are a couple of them of different sizes. And then above my head, you can barely see a black rim. That's a very large drum. We call it an Ojime Daiko, or a large Titan drum. So, and the one on the screen now is what we call an Odaiko.
Wow.
So when people think of taiko, this is one of the first images that they think of.
Exactly. Now, I'm curious about transportation of these instruments. So you travel frequently. Do you make arrangements to play on the drums at the location, or do you bring your own drums? Because the drum is so personal.
It is very personal, and I also am very lucky to be playing drums. There's a company called Miyamoto Unosuke Shoten who provides my instruments. But they're not only some of the most beautiful looking instruments, but also some of the most beautiful sounding instruments. So that's always my first choice, even if I have to take, shipping them out of my performance fee. I do that. But there are times when I simply have to rent a drum or use, and groups are always very gracious about loaning me their instruments. But inevitably, I'm playing instruments sometimes and I'm feeling like, wow, I have these beautiful instruments just sitting over there. But the expense of sending them around is, so I keep a whole set of instruments in Los Angeles for my tours and for a lot of the work I do in the mainland.
We have an image here that I confess, I pulled this off of your Facebook page, and I was fascinated by this, and I'm assuming you're either reconstructing or putting a new skin on a drum. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, and early in January, we did a major refurbishing of our dojo drums. Our dojo drums that we use for classes and rehearsals are separate from our performance drums. So those get used like 4 or 5 times a week.
They take a beating, literally.
Yeah, so sometimes the skins need to be replaced or repulled. So what I'm doing there is I believe I'm putting the dowels into the side of the skin, and later we're gonna mount them on a system and tie ropes around them and use jacks and pull it so the skin stretches out, and then we pound the tacks in.
Is this something that would be done annually, or again, I'm always looking for the ritual, because last week I took a class with Lore Otani with Buto, and the first thing we did for the new year was we cleaned the dojo, and that's the cleaning of the energy. Is this something when you clean the skins, or you just do it when it needs to be done?
We typically do it in January, and we try to do it every year. We didn't have access to a good space, so it's been a couple years since we did it this time.
This last picture, again, shamelessly pulled from your Facebook page, so I wanted people to see what an ensemble looks like, because they may have never seen this, and it's quite a production. It's amazing.
Yeah, within our school we have 2 ensembles. We have a youth group for kids up to age, up through high school, and this is my adults group. Sometimes we go by Taiko Center of the Pacific or the Kenny Endo Taiko Ensemble, but we had a performance on January 1st, New Year's Day at Ala Moana. They had us there for the past 5 years or so, and so we'll do
one stage.
Yeah, it's a new stage, and we do one set of more just the all taiko pieces, and then I'll have the second set doing my contemporary pieces.
Now, I've seen you all over Hawaii at different points of the year, so clearly people appreciate taiko drums. But are there heavier or busier seasons? I know my friends who do Brazilian dance, when there's Fat Tuesday, they're just all over the place and they're really working hard. Or for Chinese New Year, all of the different martial arts groups are doing their lion dance. I know you do things with JCC, Japanese Cultural Center, but is there a heavier time of year or a season when the demand is higher for taiko?
It seems that we're busier in the spring and the fall, and I know a lot of my tours, not only in Hawaii but in other places, especially for colleges and universities, that's the time they can program into their seasons.
Right.
In performing arts centers. So that seems to be a busier time, although we do some things in the summer as well. And then, just a couple weeks ago, as you mentioned, we did the Ohana Festival at the Japanese Cultural Center.
It's always a highlight. Now, your wife works with you. She's a musician as well in the ensemble and does, I believe, lots of administrative things. I'm curious if the rest in your family, have they picked up the same love and affinity for taiko and music?
Well, we have 2 sons, and the older one still continues to play, and he plays drum set as well as djembe, but he's actually an industrial designer. He went to Rhode Island School of Design and is working, has his own shop. The younger son also played, but and when he was a teenager, he switched to string instruments, so he plays more ukulele and guitar. And but he's now into more of marketing and management.
Hey, you can help out Dad.
They're both on the East Coast.
One could make some new drums and one could market them.
Sure.
I'm just looking at my little list here, if there's anything. We're coming to the end. You were so gracious to gift me with CDs, and I'm a fan. I go on iTunes like every other person, and I click, 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 and some of the times I don't remember half the music I've bought. It's so accessible, but given a choice, this is my preferred method. I like having it in my car and taking it to classes. Can you let our viewers know where they can find your music?
There is some on CD Baby, some on Amazon, but also on our website,
and
KennyEndo.com.
KennyEndo.com. I like web addresses that make sense, that are logical, not like, Gummy Bear 35. So that's great. KennyEndo.com. What else can we find on your website? I'm assuming maybe a schedule of your classes, more information about taiko.
Yeah, we have a schedule of our classes. We have, there's a media where you can find pictures and even video clips, and schedule our performances, and different projects that we're involved with.
I know that it's not your style to toot your horn because you're so humble, but we're giving you the chance. What can we expect to see from you in 2014? Do you have some big projects on the horizon, or perhaps our viewers who are watching that are not in Hawaii, maybe you're coming to their hometown?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to be leaving for New York next week, and I'm going to be involved with the East Coast Taiko Conference, where I'll be doing workshops as well as performances. Before that, I have a workshop in New York, and after that weekend, I have a workshop in Philadelphia.
Awesome. Hopefully no Arctic freeze.
Right. This June, I'm doing a collaboration with the Hawaii Opera Theater on their production of Mikado.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
That'll be 2 different weekends in June. In May, I'm going to be performing at the Satsuki Festival in Berkeley, California on May 18th. This summer, some friends of mine are organizing a World Taiko Gathering in July in Los Angeles, so I'm involved in that. And then a week later, there's a big Taiko festival in Mount Shasta, California called Shasta Yama. And then that group, Uncommon Time, we're performing in San Francisco in early August. And then I'm doing something with the band Hiroshima also in the Bay Area later in August.
My goodness, when do you rest? Never. You must have a serious day planner there. You must have some great miles.
A few.
A few. That's wonderful. Now, that's a lot of information. So again, if you want to find out about that, you can go to KennyEndo.com. You can also check him out on Facebook. If you haven't seen or heard, my goodness, what are you waiting for? A written invitation? This is that invitation. Please support the arts and check out Kenny Endo. Classes. I know that there are sessions. Is there the option where people can drop in? I'm not sure if that would be advisable. It'd probably be good to start at the beginning.
Yeah, normally our classes are short. The sessions are either 5 or 6 weeks long.
Okay.
So that it gives the people a chance who want to try it, the chance to do that. Yeah, so our next session is going to be starting in March.
Okay.
Early March. And yeah, anybody can do it. We have a Taiko Tots class now for 2 and 3-year-olds.
Wow.
As
I used
well.
to just hit on pots and pans. It'd be cooler to be on a drum.
And we've had people in their 70s and 80s take class too, so it's never too late, it's never too early.
And I think something that is important for people to remember is you don't have to be Japanese to do Taiko.
Oh, definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think sometimes people might be a little nervous and they say, oh, but I'm not of this culture, or I didn't grow up with it, it's unfamiliar to me. But those are no good reasons to pass on Taiko. You should give it a try.
Yeah, and the way the art is evolving is that it's a musical instrument like a piano or a guitar, and who knows where the innovation is going to take place or the quality. So I think it goes back to what you said, what we were talking about, just having a strong foundation and base.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You know, I'd love to have you again because I know that so much more, just as you said, so much more that we don't know about Taiko, and you're clearly a source. I'd like to thank you for being a part of the show today. Is there something that we can see in the immediate future, maybe in the next couple of weeks?
Let's see. I think the next, well, actually,
the event in May, I guess.
Yeah, and there's actually a really good group from Australia coming in. This is July 5th, at the East West Center is presenting a group called Taikos from Sydney, Australia, who I collaborated with a couple of years ago. And I'll be their guest in that concert as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much and Happy New Year. We look forward to having you again, and so wonderful that you could join us. Thank you so much.
Thank
Kenny
you.
Endo is our guest. I'm Willow Chang, your host. Please join us again for The Art of Life every Friday from 2 to 3. It's always a pleasure.